point for families that are going to be looking at this podcast and they're wanting help for their loved one? Give us just a nutshell overview. How does the Marchman Act work and how can families utilize it?
Well, the Marchman Act works in basically two phases. The first phase is assessment and stabilization. And what happens is a petition for assessment and stabilization is filed and the court hears it. Now, the court has a very low legal threshold to make a determination that a person needs to be assessed and stabilized. And that threshold is they just have to have a reasonable belief, and the court can go ahead and enter that order. The next phase of the Marchman Act is for services. It's what we call a services petition. You file for that, and then the court can order somebody into treatment and follow the recommendations of treatment that came out of the assessment for up to 90 days. Now, just prior to the end of that 90-day period, we could file for an extension, and we can extend that order for yet another 90 days. And we could even go beyond that if we have to. So you're already looking at 6 months, if not 9 months worth of treatment. Now, one key thing is there's two different ways to take control under a Marchman Act initially. There's a procedure known as an ex parte procedure where you file, there's actually no hearing, the court will make a ruling based on the paperwork in front of it. Now, most people that are doing this on their own, that's what they will encounter in most counties in Florida. In Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach, for instance, the court wants to give some more due process rights, so they actually do it the other way, and they require that initial hearing unless it's an emergency. So we have two different ways that we take control, and we kind of make the assessment, and we go in, take control of that person. And when I say an ex parte, we may go in and get the ex parte. As long as we know where they are, we can have the sheriff or local law enforcement go out, pick them up, and bring them into a detox facility.
So how does a family, if there's a family in another state, they're in North Carolina, how does this affect them? How can they utilize a tool like the Marchman?
Well, the first thing is the person has to be in Florida. And it's not a residency requirement. What the statute says is we have to file in the county where the person is physically located. So a lot of times we get phone calls from people that are saying, you know, I'm going to get them down into a facility in Florida. We've already made arrangements. We don't believe they're going to stay because of their history. And by the time they get into Florida, we're all ready to move so we can implement that control and make them understand you're about to see a judge and leaving is not a good idea. So it's almost like an insurance policy for these folks at that point. Or we'll get the phone call where, hey, they're already in a facility and they're telling us they're going to leave, and we'll have to act as quickly as we possibly can to file and then get them served with paperwork so they recognize, again, leaving really isn't going to be an option because now you're going to be seeing a judge. On the other hand, we've worked with national interventionists who will work with the family. They will all figure out a way to get somebody into Florida, and then once we know where they are and they get them into Florida, we can take control. Sometimes we have the luxury of using locked detox facilities that are certified by the state. There's only a couple of them in Florida. So when we do get somebody in and we do get them picked up, we can utilize those facilities so we know during that detox period they're not going to be able to walk out. They're going to get stabilized.
So that gives a family member a brief period of time where their loved one can be stabilized, detoxed, and they have an opportunity for treatment then to work.
Oh, absolutely. And typically, if we do have to get them picked up and we bring them into, let's say, a locked detox unit, or you know, we could utilize a private one that's not locked if we kind of believe they're not going to be leaving, then what will happen is we get that person picked up. There's no initial court hearing except for the ex parte hearing that we do. And once they get in there, typically by the time we bring them to court a week later, we're looking at a different person that has, you know, now they're cleaned up, there's a little bit more rationality there, and their judgment isn't as skewed, and they will typically agree then to go through the rest of the process.
And again, this is really another reason why families really do need to use the experience of an attorney who has many years' experience in this system providing this service. If I were injured, I would want to have an attorney representing me who had many years' experience in injuries.
Oh, absolutely. You know, there's one thing, I've worked on many committees in trying to redesign and redraft this statute. And one of the things I've always tried to do is, you know, some people simply can't afford an attorney, and they should still be able to move through the system and be successful. So, you know, I'm hoping for changes in the future where the individual that files on their own will be able to be successful and they can get their loved one help. Our point of view is that if a person wants to hire an attorney, they're going to hire an attorney anyway. But in our firm, anyway, we try to help everybody. So, we look at their financial need, and we will do whatever we can to make sure we can even reduce our fees, whatever it takes to help them, because we do want to help them all.
What are some of the stories you've heard about how this process has saved their loved one's life? What are some of the stories that you've been told?
Well, I've heard so many stories, and I've seen so many things personally. This is a methodical process. It takes time. Our average case goes from 5 to 8 months. We do not go away, and that case does not get dismissed until a medical professional treating the individual tells us they no longer meet Marchman Act criteria. So during the time that the jurisdiction is imposed upon them, they have to be compliant with the recommendations for treatment. We let them know up front that, listen, the way you get out of the Marchman Act is you get better. And if a doctor comes to me and says, hey, it's been a week, but they don't meet criteria anymore, our case gets dismissed. But the best thing from a story aspect is when I'm sitting in the courtroom and we're about to dismiss a case because that person may not meet criteria, and they come over to us and they thank us for saving their lives. They personally do it. I was speaking at an event once, and I had a young man come up to me, and he handed me his card, and we were talking about the brochures that he did because they were great, and we were talking. I was so enthralled in the way they looked. I said, wow, I'd like to see if we could do some business. And he said, you don't remember me, do you? And I looked at him, I said, you do look familiar. And he actually said, you saved my life 5 years ago. And that's a very powerful thing. And here he is doing so well. So we see a lot of that. I mean, there's a lot of good stories. People often call and they say to me, does this work? I mean, how many times does it fail? And I tell them, quite frankly, as long as you do it the right way, it works very, very well. And we have such a small failure rate. Once in a while, we'll get calls from families that we have to go back in and do another Marchman Act for, but it's typically from those families that have a loved one suffering with a co-occurring disorder.